Welcome to another episode of Gamers, Developers and Scholars. I'm your host Javier, and joining me today are...
Hey, I'm Charles.
I'm Poppy.
And today we're commenting Industria, a game that has been just released. So Poppy, you were mentioning to us that you were surprised. Why was that?
Yeah, so I found this game actually on Twitter, I think was where I first saw it. So as you say, it's just released. I think it was released on the 30th of September. It says it's kind of one-liner is a mystery first-person shooter that takes a woman from 80s East Berlin into a Lynch-esque parallel dimension. It kind of markets the game as being sort of around 4 hours gameplay. Charles had said on Discord that... this is the thing. And then Charles had said on Discord that it had taken him about 3 hours. So I was like, okay, cool. You know, I've been playing it for over 4 hours and thought, well, I must be coming close to the end. Looked up some kind of speed runs on YouTube, and I'm literally about halfway through. So... I've had a few issues. This is probably the most recent game that I have played incredibly badly. So the first hour of gameplay, I was woeful in terms of I was just lacking the kind of context of what to do. So for example, a very big part of the game is picking up boxes, smashing them with your axe, and stuff being inside. I was picking them up and throwing them, and they weren't breaking. So I was like, "Well, that's it."
Yeah.
So a good kind of hour or maybe even two into gameplay, I realized that I could do this, and I was playing on normal mode, right?
Okay.
This is the thing. So the game has two modes. It's normal or hardcore. So I was playing on normal, and I was thinking, this is incredibly hard.
It is
like,
hard.
Where's all my ammo? Where are my health files?
Yeah.
And of course, it was that I'd missed this kind of whole aspect of the gameplay. So I think that's what really slowed me down. In the beginning, I was kind of dying a lot. Towards the end, I've also had quite a lot of glitching, obviously because of it being such a new game.
Mm-hmm.
They've had some patch updates, I think, that they've just been doing. But what about you guys? Because, like I say, I think I've had the kind of the
You've given your full review already. So many things to unpack, fortunately. Maybe, Charles, you can tell us, what did you think? Initial remarks.
So what's funny is I had an almost opposite experience of you guys. I experienced almost no glitching whatsoever. I had a single...
How fortunate.
Yeah, no, I had a single crash and that was it. Like a few minor bugs here and there. The box thing, so in terms of like just gameplay, there are 3 games that it reminded me of. The first was Half-Life 2.
Sure.
The second was BioShock. And the third one was a game called Singularity from, I believe it was 2008. Which also borrowed very heavily from both those games, and plot-wise, I think it's fairly close to Singularity. But yeah, so like, growing up with Half-Life, I was like, oh, boxes, let me smash these until they break. Except my problem was the first couple, they wouldn't break, but it was the special ones that had like the red on them that would, and so it took me a minute to figure that out. But yeah, I fully completed the game in about probably 3 hours. Wow. I downloaded it and I was like, oh yeah, let me just test this. You know, I like to tweak my graphics and all that, and then that way I can get going. And then about 90 minutes later, I was like, well, I guess I should probably actually go to bed because it's 6 a.m. And I looked down and I realized, I just looked at the Steam achievements and I was like, I have half the Steam achievements. I'm like halfway through this game, and so I wound up sitting down and finishing it out in the in one more sort of play session. But yeah, I actually had a lot of fun with it. This type of game is very much my sort of thing, and it's very reminiscent of a lot of the games that I kind of grew up playing.
Interesting. I'm pretty sure that next we'll go about what we enjoyed the most about it, but since right now we're commenting first about how the time was a bit expanded, or maybe fortunately for you, you were able to complete it in a few hours. In the case of me, I am very aware of being mistrustful of the announced gameplay time required to finish a game, because many times we developers, sometimes we play the game ourselves and we just take the time, how long it takes, or sometimes we ask some testers to do this. So if it's the developers, we'll always finish the game faster than many players because we know exactly naturally where everything is, what you have to do. And then from the tester's perspective, you don't always have external testers who are completely new to the game, especially when you're an indie developer. So you have testers, but who are already so experienced with your game that they again play it faster than the average player. So I was kind of aware that it would be longer than the announced time. It happens a lot. I'm also a very slow player. I like to observe everything, and I was observing and the robots would kill me, but I want to observe the world. Anyway, but I had the crashes that we were discussing on the grid and conversation. That was hard for me. So I had to stop playing, and since I wanted to be ready for you guys, I had to watch a playthrough. And I believe that influences my experience because I really was enjoying the game until I had about 3 crashes at the same moment, repeatedly. And I did wonder, should I switch over to another PC? But I believe it is useful to have this experience as a regular player. That is, you only have one computer, either you can play it or you can't, and to say my experience based on that. So I was really intrigued about the setting, but that problem was really significant for me.
Yeah.
Maybe, Bobcat, you want to go ahead?
What I was going to say is, yeah, in a game like this, that makes it difficult because there's a narrative focus, but it's the kind of game where a lot of the narrative is told through your random documents, your audio logs, stuff like that. And so that can be really interesting, but it's very much a gameplay focused game, I've found. Yeah. And so like I'll sometimes do that. I'll look up like a Let's Play or something like that if it's more of a visual novel or like a point and click adventure game or something like that. But yeah, you do kind of lose something in more of a shooter type game, kind of looking up stuff like that, I feel like.
I think also, one of the things that I found was, I really enjoyed exploring the world and kind of going down the different kind of rabbit holes. But I really struggled with the game save mechanism. So again, playing on normal mode, it did auto save, but I had several times where I had played for half an hour after the last auto save, and so then was having to kind of go back. Now, obviously, each time you do that, it's quicker because you know what you're doing. But I think again, there was perhaps something a little bit there that was kind of lacking for me. So on the hardcore mode, your game save is based on finding a typewriter. So when I did find a typewriter, I used it loads to kind of supplement the auto save. But that was another thing for me that did make it a bit frustrating. Now, obviously, I suppose part of that frustration for me was I'd allotted an amount of time to do it for us to have this conversation, right? If I hadn't have had that kind of time pressure, of course, losing half an hour of gameplay is still frustrating. But obviously, I probably wouldn't have had the kind of same reaction to it. But it's interesting because the games that it reminded me of are actually probably nothing like it in terms of anything, to be honest. So the games that it reminded me of. So one of the things that it reminded me of quite a lot was Siberia and also The Longest Journey. So they're both third-person perspective, and they're not shooters. They're kind of more adventure kind of stuff. But I suppose there was that kind of element of slightly alternate reality-ness, female protagonist, that kind of mystique, some slight elements of puzzling, just in terms of like where you were going and kind of unlocking stuff. So yeah, quite different to what Charles is saying in terms of the kind of the games that it reminded him of, but in a way. And also I've just played this year Control, which is I think 2019, and again, Control has that kind of sort of alternate world where you're kind of trying to work out what was going on. So I think it sits really nicely within a kind of corpus of different games for different reasons. And I've said, like, I'm happy for everyone to spoiler what happens, but I will finish. Yeah, I will finish playing it for sure, because I was really enjoying it. I think I was just really bad at it.
It has challenge, and I believe that is something very useful when the experience is somewhat short if we compare to the content that other games have. That's one way to supposedly balance the benefit that it gives to players, the difficulty. Personally, I don't like that way, but it is a valid way to expand the benefit of a game. We can tell you what happens. We can make a quick summary of the story. So we begin in Berlin when the wall is about to fall, when people are about to cross specifically. I was so hyped about that, by the way. So we get transported when we are looking for our partner or husband. At the beginning I was not clear on that. And we arrive to this other world. Do you remember the name of the town, any of you?
It was Hakovic.
Hakovic, thank you.
Yeah.
And from that point on, we get another character who talks to us on the radio. So we're looking first to get to the surface, then from the surface to next building, next building, next building. After we reach each of these checkpoints, we learn a bit more about what has happened here. So we figure out that the king of this place is our partner, the very person we're looking for. Then we also learn that this town was ravaged by an invasion of robots. The robots also have a name, a faction.
It was the Atlas.
Atlas, that's
program,
right.
Yeah.
In between these new areas to play, we also get these black and white sections. Mm-hmm. Maybe you'd like guys to discuss a bit about the black-white sections.
Oh yeah, the libraries. Yeah, because you basically you're walking through this weird sort of ethereal library, and you go into a room it's a theater, and you see something acted out in front of you. It's usually like a 30-second sort of performance. I'll be honest, I didn't explore the libraries all that much. Again, I didn't delve as deep into the logs and things like that, and part of why was just because I wasn't feeling it at the time. I was just like, oh, let me play this game.
Sure.
The other part of it is, in a game like this, I don't always like doing that on my first playthrough, because, like, for example, we're not getting into the ending. I predicted about half of what the ending was because I've played very similar games. Because, plot-wise, it's very similar to the game Singularity. And once I figured that out, I was like, oh, this is Singularity. I've talked before about how not every game has to do something new, or about how it's totally okay to do something, kind of derivative, but in a new and interesting way. But this was an example of a game where once I figured that out, a lot of things kind of fell into place and made sense.
So it was more understandable and enjoyable for you.
Yeah, like, a lot of times like I said, with games like this, I don't go back and read the audio logs or the text logs until after I've played the game, and maybe go back through on a second playthrough, and then I can see, okay, what's foreshadowed, what's background and things like that.
In that case, I can better maybe compliment, because I was reading and listening to everything I could. So I did get maybe some things on these black and white sections that maybe not all of us got. So you hear someone who is also there at the library. That person is talking about someone who apparently moved through there. At least I interpreted it as your partner who also went through there, apparently. And like you were saying, Charles, you see this play, and the play varies a bit each time you visit there. It always has something to do with gravity. Someone is floating, but sometimes the order changes. And eventually you get the prompt that your partner in the industrial world, in the town, is located into a remote part that you need to take a train in order to get there. And so you go there. And when we get there, and we get the ending. Now, the ending, maybe you, Charles, understood it better. At least I got so many questions about it, but I'll say what I saw. You find your partner there. He's lying down. It's not clear for me if he's dead or he's sick, but even though his body is there, you hear his voice from another place, maybe like a computer. At least for me. And he explains that he had to do everything. You lose control of your character, and from there on you fall and fall and fall, and you get to see different things around you. You get to see the machines, and apparently it was your partner who got contacted by the machines, and they collaborated together so that the machines would attack this place. And he got transported, your partner, to this place to continue working, collaborating with the machines. And he says that it was a ruse for the people of the town. He never told to the townspeople that it was him that had created this mess for them. And your partner says, no, please don't say this, no. And he insists that he has to continue his work. At least that's what I understood, but I didn't get like a proper resolution because I'm not sure what happened to these two. Maybe you, Charles, understood it better?
So my kind of understanding was that he had essentially become a part of the machines, like through some sort of like uploaded consciousness or something like that.
Yeah.
I was
Singularity, it's like, there's got to be some element of that, right?
Yeah. I wasn't totally clear on what his motivation was for prompting the attack. If he was trying to, if this is more of a transhumanism thing where it's just like, I don't know, we're gonna be robots now, it'll be great. But yeah, and so the people misinterpreting that or something like that. Although it's hard to misinterpret a robot shooting at you, so I don't know what's going on with that. But yeah, so that was kind of my understanding. Yeah, he formed some kind of agreement with the machines and became one. And again, like maybe that is revealed a little bit more in the documents. I feel a little bit silly saying, oh yeah, it's probably explained somewhere in there, it's a good game. But that's kind of where I'm at with it.
So far, like I mentioned, I did read the documents, at least until the game crashed on me, and you don't get hints, at least, pointing to that.
Yeah, and so like, my general thought is that the themes, so like one of the last things that you can do in the game, you have to go up through an apartment complex, you go to a greenhouse up on the top, and you grab a photo for your the guy who's talking to you on the radio, and you can place the photo on the grave of his wife. And so I'm thinking, roughly speaking, because I also didn't do that, because I was like, ooh, there's a chapel, let me go in there. And I didn't get the signal that, oh, this is the end of the game, and maybe I should go to the left of the chapel and go put the thing on the grave. But, so I don't know if there's like an alternate ending or how that affects the ending. My thought is that the themes involved are the idea of like that loss of humanity and the idea of giving it up for the sake of cold efficiency, like, because he very much threw himself into his work. The only time you ever actually see him in person is the very end of the game. And so I'm wondering if maybe that is sort of what they were going for, was the idea of he gave up his humanity to put it into his work, and it became a very sort of literal sense where he put himself into this sort of consciousness and, invited the machines in.
Mm-hmm. In this sense, I believe it helps a lot to go back to the description of the game. As you were saying, Poppy, it's set in Berlin and you go to another dimension, but it also says that it is a Lynchesque, David Lynch inspired game. So, at least in the movies that I have watched of this filmmaker, the plot is not the most important thing. It's very, let's say, aesthetically driven, and the setting is sometimes even more important than the actual events. I believe in this case it applies. I was very hyped when I read that you begin in Berlin. I absolutely loved that historical moment, but for me it didn't have much to do with the rest of the game. Now, that is something that David Lynch sometimes does. You get pieces that, at least for me, are not too related. Then you also get these dreamlike sequences of the black and white library. So again, it is apparently like a series of experiences, because in David Lynch, in surrealism, you sometimes don't need to have these connected thoughts in a narrative driven way, but more on a aesthetic driven experience. And in that sense, you do get a lot of let's say, the constant feeling that you're not sure what is reality, what is the real universe of this place, because for the townspeople it's totally their civilization. And apparently for even our king, he was aware of the partner. He was aware of multiple worlds existing, and his work involved connecting them, even though these worlds were kind of in a loop, because he began his work and he apparently was already collaborating with the machines, if I understood correctly on the ending, right? The machines had contacted him.
Think so?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was something I was a little bit lost on.
Yeah, me too.
So yeah, it kind of makes me want to go back and replay it and actually read through everything and be like, oh, okay, maybe this is what's going on.
I think there's also there was that element at the beginning, wasn't there, where that first phone call you get, right at the beginning of the game, when you get that phone call from Walter, and he says then, like, Atlas is too big. She's like, why don't you shut it down? And he's like, oh, it's too late for that, it's gone too far. So I think there is that element of that kind of that sort of machinic takeover. I guess what it maybe tries to do is kind of consider, if we did have those advanced technologies, what would the crisis points in history be where we utilize them to escape or diverge or kind of create different realities. It's really interesting to me that again, like, some of those kind of circles of the narrative don't quite finish up, I guess. So yeah,
for me it could be more fleshed out, because at the beginning, like you say, when you get that phone call, immediately after that you get the Stasi, the East German secret police. So that gave me a lot of urgency. Like, I really want to get to my partner. I really want to get to the lab. You even get the cop car just next to you, and you find it again at the lab. If, for example, those cops had also been transported, that would have been very interesting to me. So go ahead.
I mean, yeah, the thing for me, so it wasn't just parallel dimension. He also went back about 20 years in time. That's also important not to gloss over.
But that's the thing. Maybe we can figure out to what year did he get transported. For me, he got to the future, but
I was going to say that's really interesting to me that you say he goes back in time.
Yeah,
because
so the game begins in '89.
Yeah.
Whenever she goes through, he's been in that other world for 20 years.
Yeah.
So my interpretation was that he had, like, basically that time had moved differently, or that he had gone back in time. Because my initial thought whenever I first picked up the game was, oh, he's trying to prevent the fall of East Berlin. He's trying to prevent the wall from coming down.
Yeah.
That was my immediate thought whenever he went through the thing. Because at the very beginning, you're watching the news reports of the wall coming down.
Yeah.
Because again,
so I suppose to me, I thought the same as Javier. I thought that they'd gone forward in time, but that it had that kind of Narnian-esque sense of time, that even though, like, in the first world that we inhabit, he'd probably only gone through, like half an hour before our character.
Yeah.
In the other world, he'd been there for sorry, I can't remember if he'd been there for 10 years or he'd been there for 20 years. I can't remember.
About 20 years, like Charles said.
Yeah, it was 20 years. Yeah.
So, but it's interesting. I don't know. I suppose I'd seen it as that as well because of that machinic element and how much they'd taken over. I'd had a kind of maybe a more futuristic idea of the time travel. Yeah. So it's interesting that you'd read that as
I believe
Well,
I recall what happened because our two characters got transported to different periods. So, like Charles was saying, our partner got into the past. I don't know the exact year. We don't get the exact year, but our protagonist, she goes to 1994 at least, because we find news reports that have that year. That around that year, the machines were taking over that town, and the town was being evacuated. So we're after 1994.
Okay, and in that case, we may have gotten transported into the future. I just completely misread it. But because
it's just that you were right, because our partner did got transported to the past. Because when we arrive as a protagonist to post 1994,
right,
our partner has already been here for
20 years. Yeah, he's already been there for 20 years. So he would have gone back at least like 16 years in time.
Something like that.
Or like, you split it to, I don't know, because like I said, I know that at the beginning it's 89, so you would have at least gone forward about 5 years. Because that's the thing, is that machine is never really explained or expanded upon. Like, you're going through to a parallel dimension, and I get that dimensions are going to get weird with time, and like, in a sense, I'm okay with it. Because as soon as you introduce time travel, the more you talk about it and the more you explain it, the more plot holes you introduce. Because time travel doesn't exist as we know it, I don't know that there is a way to write time travel in such a way that it actually makes sense. The example that I always go to as the best time travel story is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Because, like, toward the end of the movie, they're like, okay, we need to go back in time and steal your dad's keys and place them right here. And they go and reach behind the sign, and the keys are right there. And one of them even mentions, what if we forget to go and grab them? Well, we didn't, because they're right here. I love that. But in this game, like, you're weirdly going back and forward in time. But the problem is they explained so much of what was going on that it left me wondering how this machine worked. Your best bet, if you're going to get into things like that, is to just not explain it at all. Or to explain it less and let the audience kind of fill in their own interpretation of it.
Yeah, which with David Lynch, that happens. Maybe it was a strong reference for them. You don't get really a lot of explanation about why things happen. It's just, this is the what. You're in these different worlds, and get a brace for the ride.
The thing is, I didn't actually get much David Lynch from this. It was a little bit surrealist, but like, I'm very familiar with David Lynch's movies. I watched a lot of them. I didn't get much Lynch out of it. For me,
Eraserhead did ring a bell for me, and especially in the library when it's black and white, because the movie Eraserhead is very oriented towards critiquing companies, how they work, their bureaucracies, and the library was pristine. It was perfect, and the brief descriptions that you get about someone going through there, it is still very methodical, like he went through here, and then you get someone who is falling forever, but not in a, let's say, gelling, or like in a methodical way forever. So that rang a bell for me for Eraser.
Sorry, what were you saying?
That made me think about Control as well, in terms of there just being like certain interludes. Have you guys played Control?
I know of it, but I haven't.
Yeah, I've played the first few hours of it.
So yeah, there was just some aspects of that, the kind of intermission of the library, the very otherness of the library in comparison to the other parts of the gameplay, that kind of made me think of Control. But I wanted to go back, Javier. You said you were going to ask us what our favourite parts of the gameplay were.
Which are...
So I want to hear from you both. What were your, and also actually before we do that, perhaps, and Javier, whereabouts were you experiencing the glitching? So I'll tell you guys where I got to, where I realised that, and I was like, maybe this is close to the end, and no, it was like halfway through. It was where you got to the bit where you're supposed to go up the hill, and I guess it's your first, maybe the first kind of area where you have loads of kind of the robots onslaught at one time.
Yeah.
So that's where I got. So that was why I was like, oh, maybe it's whatever it's at the top of the hill. Maybe that's the ending. And as I say, I looked it up and was like, no, you have hours more to go. Yeah. So that's, and I had a lot of glitching there. I had to restart the game, and this was in the space of, in the space of an hour. I had to restart the game 4 times and reboot my laptop, once or twice. Now, as I say, this is a new game. I know they've done a lot of kind of bug updates. They're really active on Discord as well. They've been really listening to the community, so I know they've been doing updates. But that's when my kind of mad glitching came in. I don't know, Javier, had you got further than that?
A bit, yeah. I got too many crashes, but when you have to cross a factory.
Yeah.
So what goes immediately after your point?
Yeah, okay. So, bearing in mind, like, the different experiences the three of us have had, yeah, I'd love to hear what your favorite part of the game is, or like favorite, aspect of the game.
What about you, Charles?
I actually really enjoyed that factory level. I thought it was really fun. The whole game kind of took me back to Half-Life, and like a big part of it was kind of the stacking boxes. You had a little bit of not major, but a little bit of physics puzzling and things like that. And so it took me to a really nostalgic place, especially early on, because it even follows a lot of the same beats as Half-Life, or Half-Life 2. I mean, because you wind up in City 17, you're being chased by the police, and then you wind up not going into a different world, but all of a sudden you meet the scientist from the lab. So I think it was actually probably just the intro, like that first kind of 30 to 45 minutes for me as you're running from the Stasi, as you get into the machine, and as you first get into the world, and you're kind of just learning. I also like that despite being a shooter, it takes a while before you actually get a weapon. And so it kind of emphasizes in large part running and hiding and alternate sort of tactics. Toward the end, you can take a lot of damage and you have a ton of weapons, and it's not particularly difficult. I played it on normal, I didn't play it on hardcore, so maybe that would change it. But yeah, like I said, I think it was just kind of, for me, one of my favorite parts of a lot of games like this is just wandering around the world. And like I said, that opening part where it's very open and you can kind of walk around and examine things, and you solve that first puzzle where you have to make the explosive or whatever. That was fun for me. I mentioned BioShock, and actually in terms of the visuals, it reminded me a lot of like BioShock Infinite or something like that. I think that was kind of where some of that came from. And the combat felt more streamlined than BioShock, but I liked the combat. It felt fairly similar to that.
Nice. Some things are similar to me, like you were saying, Charles. At some point, when I got the hang of it, I was enjoying the combat. And I was enjoying that I had some combat with an interesting world, and a world that I thought would be like a different version of Berlin. I was seeing the world and, does this look like Berlin? But so naturally, that was the thing that I enjoyed the most, that you start there with the fall of the Berlin Wall, which is a very original setting for a game. I wanted that urgency to carry on in some other part of the world, so I was expecting that, but we didn't get, at least I didn't get any other hint about Berlin or the fall of the Berlin Wall. That was a bit of a small letdown, but that is because I am a big fan of that historical event, and it does help a lot to watch David Lynch movies, because you don't expect any more things to be as connected plot-wise. When I got to the point when I saw my partner as the statue, it was a weird moment because I had never seen my partner. So I immediately thought, if I had seen my partner at the beginning, this would have been a great contrast. But I just had to go with it because since I hadn't watched it at any point, it was not as surprising for me. I didn't even know my partner, so looking at him as a king, it was like, oh, good to meet you, my husband.
So what was interesting was, for me, my first instinct was that the guy talking to me on the radio was going to be my partner.
Okay.
I thought they were going to go the BioShock route of Atlas's Frank Fontaine, but instead, yeah, it wound up being that he was the king there. But that also left me with the weird feeling of, then why did we have the whole subplot with the guy on the radio? And like I said, I think it was to juxtapose the idea of retaining your humanity versus embracing this sort of very mechanical ideal, in this case in a very literal sense, but it's the idea of, I think kind of throwing yourself heartedly into whatever it is you're doing, as opposed to, again, keeping in mind the things that are important to you. Because, like I said, I think. I think the fact that we didn't see Walter was very intentional. I think that what they were getting at was the idea that perhaps she cared a lot more about him than he did about her, or that he cared a lot more about his work than he did about her.
We had the photo, right? We had the photo that was both in her room at the beginning and when she finds his office.
Great point, yeah.
Then there's this photo, but I suppose equally, like you say, there's we don't ever see ourselves either. Like when you start the game at the very beginning, you're in her flat and you can kind of go around the room. And I was very aware of the fact that you could go into the bathroom, but the mirror was like above eye level, so you couldn't see what you looked like. So that photo of you and Walter, like that was an inference. Like I assumed that's me and Walter, like the avatar and Walter. And so there was that photo, and he had that same one in his office in his world. But like you say, there was no kind of that's very different, right? Looking at like a kind of 2D photo of someone in a kind of cartoonish fashion than the statue. I was going to ask Charles, so the other thing is, do we ever meet in like face to face the man in the wheelchair? Do we know his name?
His name, yeah, I think he does say it, but we don't get to see him.
You get to meet him, because it's weird then that your closest proximity to him is at that very beginning point where you end up making the potion, the anti-rust thing.
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's interesting as well, that kind of aspect of who gets left behind, I guess. Like once the city has been evacuated, do they go further into that in terms of the storyline, like why he's still there?
Yes.
It got
explained.
Again, it's one of those things that I'm sure was discussed, but I never
I can tell
really...
you guys, no worries. So
okay.
I'm really sorry that, like, say, I had full intentions of completing the whole game.
No worries.
But tell us, Javier.
Tell us. Really casual. So he explains that when the city was evacuated, he was hurt, so he had to remain behind so that he could heal. I believe he even mentions that he was in a wheelchair, or that he is still in a wheelchair. Maybe he was, because, like you mentioned, Poppy, when we get to see him, he can run. I believe he's in his...
He's in a wheelchair, because he also, when he's speaking to us on the radio at one point, he says, so it turns out that you must be the queen of the place. And she said, well, queen of an abandoned city. And he says, oh, better than a guy stuck in a wheelchair. He is.
He's still in a wheelchair. Okay, so he's still in the wheelchair, and that's why he was left behind.
So what's interesting is we do see him, because we get the photo of him and his wife.
Yeah.
Which mirrors the photo that Walter has. So like I said, that was kind of why, at least what I got from it, was the juxtaposition of those two relationships. The idea that Walter kind of left his love, his home behind, for 20-ish years, with no real apparent desire to come back to it, with no real, like he basically just forgot all that, became king, and that was his new life. Whereas what we have is our friend on the radio. He is still clinging to his partner. He's still clinging to that previous, He wants very much to return to how things were, but at the very least, he'll help us to find our lost love. And so, like I said, that was kind of what I drew from those two different relationships and how they're treated, because there are a lot of similarities. There are a lot of sort of callbacks to that, even, again, down to the photo and whether or not we choose to place it on the grave.
Sadly, in the playthrough that I had to watch, the player also didn't place the picture on the grave, so that will be missing for us to...
I'll do it. I'll do it when I get there.
You'll tell
you know
us
what happened.
What happened.
I really, I think, of what I've played, I've really enjoyed it. I think some of the parts for me that, as I say, some of the parts that I suppose I kind of enjoy the most are the sort of more puzzly parts, in terms of, okay, you know, they do that thing a lot where it's like, okay, you're at a new scene now, you're in a new kind of area, and that initial thing of, okay, well, where do I go now? What am I doing? Once I got the hang of using the axe, the utilization of that in terms of chopping it down. One of the things that I really loved about this game as well was in terms of control. And again, like, I'm a PC gamer, so I really love the fact that when you play a PC game, you can really experience it kind of like for like in terms of controls, in terms of like, I know what duck is, I know what jump is, I know what sprint is without even trying. I had to reassign my the like health key for like topping up health, because it was Q, which on a WASD directional thing, I kept on accidentally using my health vials, so I had to reassign that one. But I like the fact as well that, you know, I thought it gave you a nice element of an area to traverse. I do think that I wonder how many people experience the kind of issues that I experienced in terms of first getting started. Like I say, I mean, this game is the worst I think I've played a game for years. And I fully take responsibility for that, whilst also wondering, you know, whether other people had the kind of same issues in terms of perhaps not grasping some of the elements of what you could do, and again, that kind of aspect of the save gameplay. But I liked the world that they created. I liked the narrative that they created, and I did think it had, or at least has for me, you know, halfway through, has that intriguing element. I want to carry on. I want to finish it. I want to kind of get further in the world. It seems, I mean, maybe a slight shame in that some of the earlier puzzlings, it doesn't seem like necessarily carry on through. Like, again, sorry, Charles, to defer to you as the person who has finished it, but also Javier, having watched the playthrough, it sort of seemed like, yeah, some of those puzzles at the beginning sort of petered out and in favor of the first person shooter kind of element. Is that, am I right in kind of making that?
So, like, what I observed was that the game kind of goes through three phases. You start out with the very puzzle heavy thing where, like I said, you don't even have a weapon for a lot of it. It's weird because it was throwing ammo at me and I was like, was I supposed to have a gun? Should I have a gun at this point? I don't know.
It kept saying ammo full, and I was like, where is the gun? Right. Like, what have I missed?
And then you go into a shooter phase, and then you go into your third, just kind of like narrative. I hate the term walking simulator, but it kind of becomes that toward the end, you know. And so, yeah, it kind of goes through all three of those. But yeah, no, I do want to circle back around to the save thing, because that is something that I've had issues with games in the past. Because the problem with autosaves is autosaves sound really good, and they can be really helpful, but a lot of times they're set to one of two things. Either you have to achieve a landmark in order to get the autosave, like in this game, or they're set to autosave every, like, 5 minutes or something like that. And the problem with both of those, when you set it to a landmark, whenever you have a really difficult area, you don't get any, like, mid-area saves. And so, like, if you're in that factory setting where you have to hit all the switches in the right order while you've got all the robots attacking you and you keep dying, you gotta beat it in order to get, you know, a save. Whereas if you do it every time, like, I've had games before autosave and just completely break my game because, like, it auto-saved whenever I had 1 health left.
Yeah.
Or, like, something like that. And so I couldn't then go back. I do like that it has the save points. Like, you know, on normal, you have the auto-saves and then you have the typewriters. And I use the typewriters every time. I don't know that I ever loaded from a typewriter, but because
I loaded typewriter a lot.
Yeah.
And again, it just must have been that what I was, again, in terms of, like, style of gameplay, I wasn't achieving, I guess I wasn't quickly achieving those kind of in-game set milestones, and so I was using the typewriters to kind of make up for my leisurely pace through the game.
Because the other thing is, I died 3 times in this game. the entire time.
That's just rude to say that.
No,
okay,
no,
I've said that it's taken me so long.
Poppy,
I'm not
I
bragging.
will make
It's
you
more-
feel better. I died countless times. If that makes you feel better.
No.
Thank you.
Again, not bragging, not putting you guys down, but like I think that was also why I didn't encounter as many of the save issues. Like the again, the game. I grew up with Half-Life 2, and the game pretty much copies Half-Life 2, and so I was like, I'm in my element. This is great.
This is another point that you pick up on with the autosave. I had one autosave where it autosaved me. I have no idea why, but right next to two of the really frenetic robots that kind of bash you and electrocute you.
Same
And
here.
so and also at a point where I had about this much health, like so.
I got that experience too. Yeah.
Yeah, and also where I was facing away from them.
Yeah,
So
they were behind you.
they were behind me.
Oh my God, maybe we
Every
got the same
time it
thing.
loaded, I had to turn around and like shoot them loads.
Exactly.
And yeah,
Inside
the amount of
a
times
building?
that I
Like in
inside
in
a
cafe,
building,
something like that.
Yes, yeah.
Oh my
so
God, we
again,
got the same issue. Yeah, I had to really
and
quickly turn around and shotgun and. Yeah.
yeah, it was, and again, maybe this is one of the bugs that they've kind of addressed, but yeah, it was. I think that's really interesting as well, where we get those save points where we think, oh God, like no,
You
please
have to.
take me back further,
Yeah, you have to take
or
into
let me
consideration.
save just after this point. I think it's a super interesting thing, though, actually, within video gaming, how the game save function changes how we experience
Yeah.
the game so
Yeah.
much.
It is weird for me that, like you say, Poppy, I got surprisingly the very same challenging autosave, like we just figured out. But that was enjoyable for me because I know that, let's say, in general, you don't want to give to players that experience because it was really hard to overcome, at least for me, that part. But that was enjoyable for me because, well, I had to really practice how to shoot, and at some point, eventually, with one shotgun blast, I murdered the two of them with one. So I enjoyed that a lot. You have to take into consideration game design and level design. You have to balance your save points. And that is something that some developers don't do enough. Because you have so many variables. Go ahead, Charles.
The thing is, so with PC gaming, the default has always just been you can save wherever. You open up the menu, you hit save, and there you go. And a lot of times you have a quick save key. So you just, it's F10 or something like that. Boom, you hit it, you quick save. And I think that in some ways, I got spoiled on that at a young age, where it's just like, oh, I hit the button and boom, I'm saved and now I'm ready to go. And then I played Resident Evil, where it's like, all right, now you have save points, they're typewriters, and you have a limited number of saves because you have to find ink ribbons. And that was a real slap in the face to me whenever I only had an hour to play or something like that every night. And I'm just like, well, I don't have an ink ribbon. So, Mom, I don't know what we're going to do here, but I got to keep playing until I get an ink ribbon because I'm not going to lose an hour of progress. And that was an actual discussion we had to have, and I didn't win it. But no,
because I came from the Super Nintendo. That was basically my first console, so I was not used to saving whenever I wanted, and that's why I enjoy being limited in when I can save. It gets me thinking into I have to plan what am I going to do. Because I may die when I can't get to a save point and I only have X amount of time, and that suspense gets lost for me when I can save at any point.
It also depends very much on the style of game. So, like, for example, what Hitman did was you could save within mission. So when you completed a mission, it always saved. You could always come back and play the next mission. But in the original Hitman, you had a set number of saves that was determined by the difficulty level within the mission. And so that way you couldn't just save scum. You couldn't be like, all right, I took out this guy, save. All right, I took out this guy, save. All right, I made it to this crate, save. Because that's really easy to wind up doing. In a shooter, it becomes a lot more difficult. Because I like being able to save mid-firefight, because there are times where it's like, all right, I did really well. I took out these, 3 enemies without taking any damage. I want to save. And when the game doesn't allow me to, that can be kind of difficult. And I don't know that...
Sorry, go.
I don't know that there's like any way, a sort of algorithm or what to figure out how to plan your auto saves. But yeah.
I was going to say the other thing is kind of links back to what Javier said. When you're also playing something that is kind of ammo dependent, and you're like, oh, I did that. That was like such an uneconomical use of my ammunition, and I know that I'm. So there was points at which where like I just quit and reloaded because I was like, that was terrible. Like whatever I've just done since the last load point, I have just used so much ammo that like, I'm not dead yet, but I'm going to be dead soon. So I think there was that aspect as well. But again, like, you know, I agree. I think it is a really difficult line to tread. I suppose one of the things that we've kind of touched on here is that it very much depends in terms of how you play it. If you're playing it in terms of progression, then, and you're kind of going quickly through the different levels, through different aspects, and kind of getting from A to B quickly, then the saves come quite quickly. If you're exploring more, they come more slowly because of that idea of reaching a particular kind of point. And I suppose maybe what I would say in terms of Industria in this perspective is that it's not quite balanced in terms of being equal to both modes of gameplay. Like the fact, this is where I'm saying that the fact that Charles only died a few times is because of the way he played, not because of his skill. but I mean, you know, he going about that kind of way of thinking, well, rather than focusing on the narrative and the narrative aspects, I am just going to kind of do the journey and then getting through it more quickly, having more of those saves and experiencing that as less of a problem. Whereas if you have got more of this open world, perhaps what you need is a save that accommodates both gameplay styles. I mean, that said, like say, I'm definitely going to finish it. I've really enjoyed it. Like say, I there are a bunch of bugs, but it definitely seems like they're very responsive to those. They're very kind of engaged in their Discord community. So I think, you know, it's so far for me, like I say, as slowly as I have played it, it's been enjoyable, and I look forward to playing around.
You're an awesome player because you're patient. There are so many players that, oh my god, first bug and that's it.
No, I mean, I think as well, but the fact as well that I'd seen, you know, it was coming out on the 30th of September, and I said, you know, oh, this would be my kind of suggestion. I think if you're playing it that early, you have to be, especially, you know, from a kind of indie developer. I'm not familiar with any of their other games. I'm not sure if they're, if this is their kind of first foray. But I think, you know, I think what we've sort of picked up on, I suppose, is that it's got a variety of different enjoyable gameplay elements, both from puzzling, shooter, the acquisition of the different weapons, the narrative, and that kind of world. So yes, it's limited, and yes, it might need some more development, but I think overall
I would agree. I think that one of the things that does really well, that a lot of games like this don't, is it really nailed the combat. It nailed the gunplay. Like, part of it also is I probably play a lot more shooters than pretty much anyone else in our group. At one point, I was playing Call of Duty at a pseudo-competitive level, and I was like, you know what? Let me back off of this, because this is like eating up all my free time. But yeah, and so I can tell you, the gunplay is really good. It's really solid. It's really well balanced. The shotgun is massively overpowered, but I'm okay with that. But yeah, and so I think that it nailed that, because I think a lot of indie games are really good at nailing the narrative, and they're really good at nailing the themes and things like that, but then the actual gameplay winds up being kind of unsatisfying. And the thing that you got to remember is, outside of visual novels or like point-and-click adventures, the gameplay is how you get to the story. It doesn't matter how good your story is if it's not any fun actually going through it. And that's something that I don't mind in games whenever they have the like super easy mode, or it's just like, here's how you experience the story, for players who aren't as into that. But I also respect that in Industria, they took the time to actually create a really good shooter that then also they integrated all these elements into. Because like I said, I'm saying it compares favorably to BioShock Infinite, which is a massive AAA game. It was in development for a long time. Like, if you're able to do that, you have a lot of potential, and I think that this game has a lot of potential if they can tweak it, clean up the bugs a little bit, you know. Like, my first thought was, I really wish this game was a little bit longer, but then I realized, wait a minute, I just sprinted to the end because gunplay is fun.
The opportunity cost is very interesting because I also enjoyed the shooting aspect. I did not expect that would be one of the strong points of this story rich, as it's tagged on Steam, story rich David Lynch game. So I was surprised about enjoying that, but like Poppy was saying, I did get the sensation that this was not balanced. Let's say there were clear opportunity costs. So we got settings that did get across this surreal aspect. We also got very well polished shooting, but these as a whole maybe had some parts that were not helping each other. For example, we have already discussed it, the bugs. These crashes, these aggressive crashes that at least I got, I know more or less why they happen, and you have to prioritize. Either you're going to prioritize like it happened, you're prioritizing your shooting to be very well balanced. That happens when you have animations, programming, you have to devote your resources on that, but then you're not fail-proofing all of your level to realize if the hitboxes are sometimes well implemented. And the developers chose some aspects. The gun aspect, the shooting aspect was well polished because they prioritized that. I mean, that's why it is an enjoyable experience. At least for me, I wish that, while I enjoyed some other parts, that the Berlin aspect were not just the starting point, but had more relevance for the game, because that is a very original premise for a game. I had seen in so many games, more games than maybe I need, boxes and destroyable boxes. That has been done to death. So it didn't add too much to me to have yet again boxes that I can destroy. I was also missing something about music. We haven't mentioned this, but there was no music. You can totally make a game without music. It allows you to be very immersed into when is there going to be a robot so that I'm ready. But there were some points when I was like, okay, maybe it is intentional. I feel like I'm in East Berlin. If you go to East Berlin today, you still get a vibe different from West Berlin. I love that. The architecture is different. So I thought, okay, maybe there is no music because this is a version of East Berlin in the communist era, but different. But naturally, like I mentioned, I didn't find anything more about Berlin in this new world, so it was my own theory that didn't pan out.
Here's the thing. I didn't notice lack of music until you mentioned it, because there are record players and records around that you can get and you can activate.
Oh, you can activate them? I did find them.
Yeah, so you can pick up records.
I was so worried about not finishing the game in time for you guys that I did read everything. I believe I am somewhat of a fast reader, but I didn't interact with so many things.
Right.
I think the other thing is, obviously, in terms of gamers, devs, scholars, we've just come from playing Chicken Police, which had that kind of heavy aesthetic and oral world. There was that very specific soundtrack. I had this thing with the record player where there was one record somewhere where I was convinced that there was a record that was like in the scenery, and I was convinced that you should have been able to pick it up, and I couldn't pick it up. But later I could pick up a record, I could play it. So yeah, I think, and again, the technology of that being the kind of gramophone with the record, again, kind of added an interesting aspect in terms of the like the temporality, and so yeah.
Well, and I want to go back and play it more and see if the Berlin thing actually comes back. But I think also, like, the game is listed as narrative driven, and I completely disagree with that. I don't think it's narrative driven at all.
Yeah, I didn't feel
that. I think that because I think that it's a game that's more about the themes and the tone involved. I don't know that we really got those themes and tone fully from our different playthroughs, but like that's it's a fine thing, and I think it's something that we don't really articulate very often. But there are a lot of games that are not at all about the story. The story is there, but it's a pretense, but the idea is what the audience is supposed to take from it. And one of the things that, shameless plug for my YouTube channel, next video coming soon, I promise. I've been saying for the last 3 months. But a lot of times whenever we talk about analysis, people get hung up on what the author intends. And that is a part of analysis. It is an important part of analysis, but it's not the core of analysis. Analysis is also about what we take from it. And so I think that it's interesting to discuss what the developer intended, but I also think that it is important to discuss what we took from it and the themes and things that lasted with us. Because developers are not the gods of their world like I think sometimes people think of them as. I think sometimes they think of them as. The reality is that in many cases, the players wind up making more of the world than the developers ever do. Absolutely. And it's the same thing with movies, and it's the same thing with books. You know, I am sure that
shameless cultural theory plug. Roland Barthes wrote The Death of the Author, and it was exactly about this, about how, you know, we kind of have previously considered things as being kind of author-led, but actually, it's very little to do with what the author has intended. It's much more in terms of how the audience has perceived that, in terms of both, like, everything from socio-cultural, historical investment to kind of interpersonal and individual investment.
If there are any videos or papers about that, Poppy, be sure to share it.
I'll send them your way, yeah.
The example I always use is The Matrix. First of all, I don't like The Matrix, but that's my hot take. But when it comes to The Matrix, I have seen it used as a metaphor for everything from conservative and liberal politics to Christianity to gender identity to everything. The whole idea of the red pill, blue pill thing. Now, to me, now to me, that is the idea that movie is really poorly written and not really about much of anything, and it's a surface level exploration of philosophy that can be applied to virtually any concept. But my point is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the Wachowskis intended. Currently, they've gone back and said that it was about their sort of gender identity and about experiencing, you know, their transition and things like that. I don't believe that was the original intention for a second, but that's me and that's the film critic in me. But I don't think it matters because I think that it's what they took from it. I think that it is them going back and looking at it and saying, oh, this is where some of these ideas came from, and that's totally valid. And that's fine. And so it's the idea of, it doesn't matter what the Matrix is about, it matters what the Matrix means to you.
And what I would say about this is, I'm going to avoid the Matrix analogy, although I'm very keen for Matrix 4, but to say that actually, whilst both of you are saying that you don't think it's the narrative, the thing that makes me want to keep playing Industria is to find out where the narrative goes. Even though, as much as I agree with you, you know, the narrative is kind of a lesser part of the gameplay. For me, the reason that I want to keep playing is that I want to see where the narrative goes. So I think that really reinforces your point, Charles, right? It is what we make of it.
Yeah, and the premise was really strong. I believe if you have a very interesting premise, that can help, even if some other elements of the narrative or even the game may not be as polished. You are hooked from the beginning, and that helps you to power through all other challenges. So in this sense, maybe we can finish our discussion, because if we go over 1 hour, people get tense about watching too much. But I look forward for you guys to sharing your content. Maybe, Bobcat, I don't know if there's enough time for you to publish your video, but if not, we'll just leave the link to your channel as ever. And also, Poppy, leave the links to those culture texts and presentations, because I know so many colleagues that still push the developer as the main author, as the most important voice, and I agree with you guys. It's more about the players, at least for me. So check out the links for our guests and for our game. And thanks a lot for the Industria team. It was an interesting experience, and we look forward for them to keep polishing the issues that we mentioned. Yep. So have a great Sunday, guys. Take care.
Good luck. Bye.